Thanks to you. Now I'd like to invite our wonderful panel for this topic, which consists of Ibrahim Asmani, Yashita Saxena, Aryansh Rathur, and Ayush Dasanacharya.
Hi everyone. So we'd like to begin our panel discussion with our first question, which is why are other nations with already existing infrastructure not able to do the same as China, which is digitizing their economies to the same extent as China in a post-COVID-19 world?
Well, in my opinion, the first reason is comfort. Everybody's already comfortable with the existing payment structure with physical money. It'll be very hard for people to transition into a digital economy and will require a lot of money and a lot of input from governments. People simply aren't prepared to put in the effort that is required to make this transition, and thus will cause them to falter.
I'd say another thing that limits people from going digital or dark, as Theo said, is infrastructure. As in, you look at low-income countries in Africa, not every single grocery store has a digital payment system. And that hinders them from being able to accept payments via people's phones. And comfort is obviously a really big thing. I mean, you walk around, you've got 5 dirhams in your pocket, you're able to pay for your McDonald's. And that smoothness is something that can't be replaced really easily.
Yeah, I think for countries that already have the infrastructure, the main thing is culture. The main thing is, it's quite weird to stop using cash. I think Ayush was telling me before that in China, in the major cities of China, like Shanghai, there's no cash. No one uses cash. And just thinking about that is weird. To think that in the entire city or even in the entire country, no one uses cash. It's quite alien. And I think that's the biggest barrier for countries that already have the infrastructure. But in terms of countries in general, in barriers in general, the main thing is infrastructure. And I guess smartphone ownership is part of infrastructure. But just for some context, Pakistan, I know, there's 20% of people own a smartphone. And that's only 20%. It's 1 in 4. And while numbers might be a bit higher for phones in general, that's still a very low number. And that's a huge barrier to digitalize the financial sector. If people don't have phones, don't have the tech, then how are you going to use tech, right? And I'm sure the numbers are similar throughout the region as well as in South America and in Africa. So I think that's the biggest barrier.
Yeah, that's a really good idea because there aren't that many nations in the world that sort of have the same infrastructure as China and America that have the capability of sort of digitizing their entire economy to the same extent. Moving on, how do you think China's dominance in digital currency affect the global order?
I think that's a really good point to bring up because the USA at this point, which is the global standard, I mean, everything is benchmarked against the US dollar. The USA right now is inflation nation, right? The US Federal Reserve has, they gain 500 billion to 1 trillion US dollars by underreporting inflation by 1%. And so they have a lot to gain and very little to lose by underreporting inflation. And we've seen this everywhere. Lumber prices for wood have gone up 70+% in the last 3 months. So, if you're a homeowner in the USA and you want to get some repairs done, or if you want to build a home, it is suddenly 70% more expensive for you to do that. For phone manufacturers, copper prices have gone up 40%. And, at this point, it's like they are printing so much US dollars that it's devaluing at a rate faster than, is available with other currencies. And I think that's going to cause, a competition to the US dollar. You don't want to put your entire net worth in something that's monopoly money, right? So going ahead, I think we're going to see a real shift in the paradigm that is the power that the US dollar holds in terms of being the global benchmark in regards to currency.
I think competition in general, for the US, throughout US's superpower era, they haven't had much economic competition. The Cold War was mainly competition in terms of military capacity, so between the US, but China, for the first country, I think in the era of US being the superpower, there's a lot of pressure on the US in terms of economic capacity of the country. And I think you see this, this pressure already coming up with Biden already in his first speech to Congress, with his proposed plans of firstly the Americans' job plan and the families plan, I believe it is. The way he was trying to convince the Republicans was citing China. And he was telling the Congress, the Republicans, we have to pass this because we want to compete with China. I think that's a direct way you see how China's dominance in financial services, but as well as just in China's rise in general, it's putting a lot of pressure on the US. And personally, I think competition, or at least some competition, is good. And whether you think these plans are good or not, I just think competition in general, and whether that definitely threatens the global order, whether it changes it, that's depending on how these two countries react, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I find it extremely interesting you talked about the Cold War. And it's true that if you think about it, after the Cold War and the USSR's defeat, as we can say, the USA has been left undefeated. And I think the difference between, there's such a big difference between the values and cultures between China and the USA is so different that it will disrupt our world. I mean, as we've seen already with Europe and other countries, the US-China trade war has already played a huge impact in their economy. But moving forward, as China is now a leading member in this shift to completely digital payments, as you mentioned, and I just find it extremely interesting to find the role between which countries are going to be able to come on top of this race, and the potential impact this will have on the international liberal order that was established, per se, by the United States post-Cold War era.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen how a lot of people have been investing in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum from their skyrocketing share prices over the past few months, and how they're moving from investing in the more conventional like gold or just US dollars to cryptocurrencies. Now, my next question is, how do you think the digitalization of the economies around the world would lead to financial inclusion?
Theo said it best, go digital or go dark. I think we've seen this reciprocated across every single asset class, every single market you can think of. The Federal Reserve is keeping rates so low that, you just don't want to keep your money in a safe place anymore. Because you are losing money since inflation's higher than the interest rates are. So people are going out, they're investing in stocks. We've all seen what's happened with GameStop. That was crazy, right? And we've all seen what's happened with cryptocurrency. Bitcoin has been on a trip of its own, 620% up, year to date, right? And I think this decentralization of finance, this shift away from going to a traditional centralized banking institution, to put your money aside and let them play with it for you. I think that's going to shift to, something that's decentralized, right? Banks have defrauded people for quite a while now. We saw it in 2008, we saw it before that, and this has been going on. And, if we're moving away from something that is, less focused towards the guys at the top making all the money, and we're going towards something that is, in the public eye, that is definitely going to be, something that's going to be a move in the right direction.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because, like you said, it's about decentralization. In our parents' and grandparents' days, what their advice was to do with money was to spend some of it and save some of it. But recently, you're becoming in charge of your own money. You're not putting your faith in banks or the central bank. You, like he said, you can invest in stocks and take charge of what you want to do with your money. This is basically giving power to people. I mean, you're allowing them the freedom to spend it in the economy, to boost the economy, or if they want to, keep it in something more safe.
We hear decentralization good, centralization bad, but I know you alluded to it a bit. But if you could explain why centralization is not seen as a positive.
So centralization, personally, I think is not a good move. Mainly because of the fact that people can manipulate it to do things that they want to do. We don't, as humans, we don't look towards something that is necessarily right. We look towards figures that are authoritative. You would be much happier, going to someone that asserts power, asserts confidence, than you would going towards someone who is, weaker, say. And I think, having all of, a person who controls everyone's money is obviously going to want to make themselves a little shed on the side, right? So something like that where, you've got everything in the public eye, in the public domain, that reduces fraud, that reduces, the ability of someone to take the numbers, to take the facts and twist them to what they want them to be. I think that ability absolutely stops.
Playing devil's advocate here, is it feasible for us? Is it a sustainable way? If we look at Bitcoin alone, already consume in a year, the transaction consume more electricity than all of Argentina combined. And if we talk about, don't even get me started on NFTs and all this new technology, it consumes way too much energy. Can we, as a planet, who are already struggling with growing impacts of our reckless consumption like climate change, is this feasible to consider this as a long-term growth, as a long-term strategy in development? Is it even feasible and sustainable?
Well, first of all, I think it could be sustainable because by digitizing the economy, yes, we would be using more energy, but have you thought about the number of the notes that are printed like every day by the reserve banks of nations that are used by people? That would be like drastically reduced. So there would be negatives, but I think the positives would sort of overpower it, and it would, in the long term, be a more sustainable move.
I think she brought up a good point there because, on a longer term thing, Bitcoin miners, people who verify transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain end up making more money and being sustainable just because of the fact that, they're running at a capacity that ends up making them a technical economy of scale, right? The average costs are brought down to the point where it is genuinely sustainable for them to be using that much electricity and for them to be putting that much back into the blockchain by verifying that many transactions and making sure that the blockchain is secure.
I think, if we don't mind, back to the original question of financial inclusion, I think one thing is important is to realize how important financial inclusion is. And the way I like to think about it is it sort of bridges the gap between incentive and ability. And what I mean by that is the rich, the upper class, the top 1%, we say, they have the most ability to innovate, to go out on business ventures, to take risks, because, well, they have more security. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. The poor, however, they're unable to do that, but they have the most incentive. They have the most to gain. They're at the bottom of the pyramid, and poverty is a quite vicious cycle. And so they have clearly the most incentive to come out of that. And what financial inclusion allows people, the poor especially, to do is access finance, access capital, to allow them to come out of that vicious cycle and come into the middle class and innovate, run businesses. And back to the overall theme, it seems like financial and digitalization of the financial sector. Fintech seems to be a very significant player in helping with that. We talked about it a bit, it seems like. We talked about how all you need is very low cost, it's quite efficient. You just need a smartphone. It makes it quicker. You don't have to go to a central bank to have access to this. And that's very important for economic development, and it allows people, it gives the people the opportunity to rise, which is kind of what we want, what governments want. Yeah.
And that's a good point, financial inclusion, right? Since going digital, it helps poor people, people who need capital the most, get access to it, right? If I showed up to a bank, in rags, they'd laugh me out, right? I wouldn't be able to get a loan, I wouldn't be able to open a bank account, and none of that would happen. However, websites like Kaiva, organizations that, let you loan money to people who need it the most, stuff like that helps, right? They've got a 96% repayment rate, and they're positively affecting people's lives around. Microfinance is one thing that's going to be, instrumental in development going ahead.
All right, so I think we've discussed some great ideas here today. To end the panel discussion, I would like to leave you with a thought. Who do you think is going to lead the fourth industrial revolution? Will it be the American giants of Google and Facebook, Amazon, or will it be the growing Chinese companies that we've talked about today? Thank you.